Welcome to the Not Badger for the week ending September 3rd, 2016. Here, thanks to our indentured Ronin, who are indebted to us thanks to a loophole in the Code of Bushido, we have compiled a collection of funny, interesting, and hopefully useful clips from our most watched shows. Enjoy the spoils of their hard work. In Polecat Cast number 77, we look at the stories of the week, including orgasm inequality, male suicide, and flirting for feminism. Finding Mr. Dreamy is difficult because the main strategies a girl can use are wrought with danger. Number one is proactivity in 2016. It seems fair that a woman can approach a chap she fancies. This sometimes works, but generally does seem to make the man's inside shrivel up when asked, having a good night or something equally menacing. So we consign ourselves to option 2, which is waiting. So apparently, approaching a man, if he's uncomfortable with your approach, makes you not want to approach him. So let's get men to do it, so when they don't want to be approached, they will be more persistent and then perhaps get arrested.
Does she not see that she just explained why men have a rough time approaching women? Is she like that stupid?
Yeah.
I don't want to approach men because it's hard. Here, if they reject me, I'm having a rough time.
Yeah.
And then she makes fun of, like, can you imagine a man writing this article and complaining that women shrivel up when asked having a good night? You know, there'd be like 1,000 comments on the article from women just going, "Stalker!" You know, and he's not. He's just sad that he's getting treated as persona non gratis. I don't know what's wrong with her. Like, I've never noticed this. Like, I've approached a lot of guys, you know, and just during when I was dating and everything, that was not an uncommon thing for me to just walk up and start talking to somebody. And that's never been a problem. I mean, I've gotten turned down before, but nobody's ever been upset about being approached.
Have you ever gotten mace to the face or a bunch of cops to beat you up or anything like that?
No. Usually I get, "Thank you, that's really sweet, chuckle, chuckle, but I have a girlfriend," or, you know, if I'm getting turned down, or, you know, or but I'm not interested, or, you know, whatever. And once in a while I got, "But I don't swing that way," but never got, "You creep, get away from me, what's wrong with you, shame on you," nothing like that, you know, or nothing like, you know, "Oh, you slut, you know, whore, bitch," none of that. I got that from gals that knew that I asked guys out, but I never saw that happen. I wonder what she's doing that's making the man's insides shrivel up when was she approaching him, "Hey, having a good night?"
Yeah, right.
She got wide eyes and looking scary. "Having a good night?"
I hope you're enjoying your evening, sir. Would you like to come back to my parlor? Eventually, one guy asked if we'd like to join him for some table football. He was dashing and curious. He was German, of course, because the only people who'll ever chat you up in Britain are not British. So she goes around insulting British people and then complains that British people are not approaching her. This is the logic. After which, the whole social schema is made so incredibly hostile to anybody for trying to talk to each other lest they get arrested or ticketed, in which, what was it last time well, I mean, I haven't looked recently, but the last time I remember we looked at the Nottinghamshire thing, ever since they made wolf whistling and unwanted approaches to women a hate crime, there have been 20-something incidents and a couple of arrests! And yet...
Yeah, and that was a few weeks ago, too.
Yeah, and that was a few weeks ago.
There's been more by now, so...
Now, I'm not Claudia Schiffer, but I don't think I'm Chewbacca either. Yet operating in this asexual environment, it is possible to feel largely unattractive. Some sort of winter chill has frosted over British men's gonads, and it's leaving us all out in the cold.
Hold on, let me address that for a second. Some sort. There is a place in Great Britain where they actually made it punishable to approach a woman.
Yeah.
Some chill, like, "Oh, how did this happen? I have no idea." Well, fucking open your eyes, retard. Jesus Christ.
Loneliness kills. So dithering lads, that's men that don't ask women out despite all the risks involved, and I don't just mean the risks of rejection, because that wouldn't be a big fucking deal. There are plenty of countries where you'll probably get approached by men and they don't care whether you reject them or not. I'm just saying, I'm not naming any places, but there are places you can go, some of which are in Europe, and you will get approached. and you will be beating them off of you literally. But apparently,
Jesus Christ, Brian.
You had to use that phrase.
But apparently, if you are a dithering lad, someone who doesn't approach a woman, you are murdering them because the loneliness will kill them. So women are still the victims in this particular scenario. I'm not sure what the psychological reasons for their inactivity is. Perhaps feminists have scared them off with complaints of catcalling. So much so that, like the Jesus lizard, a wolf whistle is near extinction. Well, the wolf whistle's fucking illegal now. So, yeah, maybe that's why. And this is what I'm talking about. This seems to be a woman that is upset about the way things are and is blaming the men for it instead of looking at laws that have been passed and the way that the academia works. You know, Scott mentioned the 8-year-old. It's almost like when you have an 8-year-old boy and they're still learning what boundaries are, and they generally don't care about rules because they don't really recognize, you know, especially like societal, cultural ones, then they'll just ask a girl or a boy whatever it is they want to ask them. And then it's almost like they're conditioned or learned to unlearn those things and to be afraid. This is what happens. So, yes, what's your fucking name? Charlotte Gill. You might want to think about where that's coming from and stop blaming men for not manning up. Because I don't see any reason why men should man up, according to your definition, when it's just too fucking dangerous. So this is not a woman who is a feminist. This is a woman who wants things the way they used to be. And she thinks that there is some way to get back to that. And the way to do it is to shame men and tell them they don't have their balls. Specifically, in this case, British men.
She's got no one to blame except the war on men, with feminism, basically. And they're actually getting closer to it. I came up with an analogy quite a while ago that it's like two orbiting satellites around a planet, always constantly shitting on the planet, but they can't see each other because they're at antipodal orbits. So they're always shitting on the thing in the middle and blaming the thing in the middle because they can't see the shit coming from the other thing. But I'm starting to notice that they are noticing each other now. They're more like the twin rover twisters from the Ocarina of Time, those fucking witch sisters. They're actually seeing each other doing it now. She actually says, oh, perhaps feminists have scared them off with complaints of catcalling. Yeah, I did see that. I saw everything that happened, but I'm still going to poke you with my fucking fire wand. Because I'm just going to pretend that she didn't do that with the ice wand just now. Loo-lee-la-lee-la.
Yeah, it's like we're shitting on this planet together, but it is such a big and powerful planet. Why doesn't the planet just stop being shit on and just like get its own, I guess? I don't know. But yeah, that's pretty much what it is. I mean, I don't know. There's just very not sympathetic towards men because all of this is about her. If she found a man early on and all this was still going on, she wouldn't be writing this piece. So that's another thing that's also important to put out there. This woman is talking about herself.
This is a really good example of a woman not understanding men's choices because she's speaking from a place of having less requirement in her life to consider the consequences of her actions before she acts on them, of her potential actions before she takes them. Because she's actually criticizing men for considering the potential consequences of a choice before making that choice, and then basing their choice on the best possible outcome, or to avoid the worst possible outcome. I mean, that's normal human behavior, that's adult behavior, and she's pissed off because men are acting like adults. And the only reason that she has the luxury of getting pissed off at anybody for acting like an adult is because, being female, there are huge swatches of her life that are shielded from her having to do that. And it's something that men in general don't have. And there are men who have money that can help them get away with things that men who don't have money can't get away with. But none of them have the amount of privilege in their own class that women have with respect to this. This is something that you hear all the time in media, and particularly, feminist writers will act like it's been, men telling women that women are not sexual and men claiming that men are sexual all the time. It's been the other way around. Most of the stereotypes involving sex are driven by women. Women slut-shame each other. Women compete with each other for men. Women are sexual beings. We aren't the sexual teetotalers that female society makes us out to be. And that's something that, you can't use something as a get what you want card if it's common and it's easily accessible. But you can if it's controlled and people think that you're giving it grudgingly, or people think that you have to be persuaded to give it. And women a lot of times will treat sex very much like money. I will withhold this until I get what I want.
It's absolutely currency.
And this is not to say condemnation or approval or whatever. That's the way it's been for hundreds of years. The women have treated sex as a currency. And of course, with marriage evolving the way it did, with it being a family arrangement, with it being something that was arranged between the parents and very, very often as part of a business deal or as part of a, like a union between the families or a treaty depending on what type of family you were from. It wasn't like intimacy was something that wasn't a free choice for everybody. It wasn't something that you could just go, I'm just going to be intimate with whoever I want to. No, society really clamped down on that. And women, their only way, because this is the way things were, their only way of ensuring, I'm going to get a good husband, I'm going to have a good life or whatever, if they didn't want to take the man's role and live on their own and earn their own living and make their own way, that's what they had to do, was use sex as a bargaining chip. That you put their reputation into their loyalty to their family, they had to put their reputation into their fidelity, and they had to ensure that other women did the same. Because if they didn't, those two things would be worthless. And so when women acknowledge that we like sex, we're like scabs to the rest of the women's strike. Or we're like non-union workers to the rest of the women's union. And they hate that. They absolutely hate that. And there's a great deal of social penalty among women for women who basically violate that unspoken, or rather quietly spoken, condemnation of having sexual interest. And, at the other end of it, men have always been expected to be virile and reproductive, and because of that, because you have to have heirs, right? You have to have kids that work your business, your farm, your business, that, in the city, whatever. You have to have kids to replace you when you die. And it's always been this, an unfertile adult has always been seen as problematic. The old spinster, the old maid, the guy who never marries, the hermit, the couple that can't have children is pitied. And a man who doesn't get off when he has sex must have something wrong with him, right? Hookup culture is bad for men. It's not necessarily good for women, but it's really bad for men. It is the quickest, easiest way to subject yourself to the risk of a false rape accusation.
And an STD.
Don't, my biggest recommendation on that is just don't. And not saying don't have sex, but don't do it that way. Get to know people, vet a woman for character before you trust her with your freedom like that.
Sex education doesn't teach us about pleasure, especially female pleasure. Sex education is not supposed to teach you about pleasure. It's supposed to teach you about being safe, isn't it? First of all, I always thought it's weird that you go to school for sexual education. But if I ever went to school as an 11-year-old boy, I think that's when I first took my first sexual education class, and there was a man with a diagram of the vagina telling us how to please a woman, I would be so uncomfortable. I don't know about you. That is
Yeah.
There was a scene in that Monty Python film, The Meaning of Life, where John Cleese is the teacher. What do you do, boy? Rub the clitoris. What's wrong with a kiss, boy? Don't go stampeding towards the clitoris. Get the vaginal juices flowing. He was joking. They were joking at the time, but apparently this article is not.
One of the things that I found was, and when I used to live in Atlanta, I moved from there in like 2008, roughly. But when I lived in Atlanta, I didn't have insurance because I was working a shit job, going to school, and I didn't have the money for insurance. So I had to seek, government-assisted help as far as like with mental health issues and as far as being sick. And I'd gotten sick, and this was the first time in probably 20 years. I'd never had the flu before, but I got the flu when I was like gravely, gravely ill. And I know this isn't mental health, but I'll get there. It's connected. And one of the problems was I was seeking help through local clinics and stuff, and I kept finding out that the men's clinics had all been shut down. Every single one of them. Every single one in the Atlanta area had been shut down. And it got to the point where I ended up talking to the woman who was in charge of all of the clinics and like the funding and, you know, dealing with all that stuff. And she told me very flatly that all the money from men's clinics had been diverted to women and children's clinics because they didn't think it was that important. And that was the same thing when I was trying to find mental health services. I was experiencing the same problems. So this idea that men don't seek help and that there are barriers that are just, you know, societal barriers is kind of a little horseshit. Because frankly, when it comes right down to it, I was told flatly in not so many words that men's lives just were not that important and that women's were more important and children's were more important. So they diverted the funding that was set aside for men's health to other places. So this kind of infuriates me. This makes me very, very angry.
It's almost like that might be the reason why men aren't speaking up, because nobody gives a shit.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, because it's not that they're not. It's just when you actually try and find these services, they simply do not exist in many places. And obviously, it's happening in the UK. It's to the point where it's become national news, and it happened in Atlanta. So I have to imagine. And, you know, I'm extrapolating information for what's available here, so it might not be true everywhere, but I have to imagine the same scenario is playing out in a lot of different places. I can't see that it wouldn't be. And this is infuriating that they want to blame men. They're blaming men. They're shaming men. Well, they don't want to get help. There's, you know, blah, blah, blah. Bullshit. I wanted to get help. I know plenty of people that have been in the same situation that they just literally could not find help because it was not there. There were no resources for them to take advantage of. So this idea that men just, they're just stubborn and, you know, they just don't want help. They find it hard to ask for it. That's a bunch of bullshit. That's a bunch of goddamn lies. And all it does is reinforce this idea, you know, this kind of old hand way of looking at things where, oh, men just don't look for help. Yeah, that's bullshit. That's a bunch of goddamn garbage.
So, but based on what I'm seeing in like different groups of different social networking groups, like Skype groups, people talking in Twitter private messages where, you know, you can have a group private message, or on Facebook and things like that, any place where there's a whole group of people having a discussion, the discussion stops when a guy talks about a problem he's having. And there will be this pause until people wait for the appropriate amount of time, but between when he posted what he posted and when they feel like it's safe to post something without seeming too callous that isn't related to what he said and completely ignores his post, so like they can pretend they didn't see it, and then the conversation will start again. And it's everything from, you know, minor problems to, you know, I just had to get a tooth pulled, to I think my wife wants a divorce, or I'm afraid I'm about to be homeless because I'm going to get thrown out of my home. You know, and I've seen everything in the middle of all of that. I've seen, you know, guys talk about things that indicate that they may be having suicidal thoughts, and they get completely ignored in these forums. And unless it's specifically, and sometimes even if it is specifically men's issues focused, it's like nobody knows how to handle when a guy says, I'm having this problem. And it's bad enough that I wouldn't be surprised if it's happening in person. If it's to the point where, you know, if somebody is hanging out with their family and they say, you know, I think my wife is cheating on me, that the conversation might pause for a moment and then go on with what was being said before the guy said that, and nobody addresses it because it's just too hard to look at the possibility that this man might be suffering. And it's, you know, it's a disconnect that's I've seen more obvious with men who have disabilities or men who have chronic pain or things like that, where the problem doesn't have a solution and he just needs somebody to listen, and he doesn't need somebody to offer him advice. He just needs to be able to say, it really sucks that my back hurts all the time and it's not going to get better. And have somebody go, yeah, man, that really sucks. I wish it would change. You know, I wish there was something we could do about it. I feel you, you know, and that's it. Like, a guy can't even get that. And, you know, a woman gets breast cancer and it makes the news, especially if she doesn't have insurance. A guy can die from it and nobody says anything. The only way he's going to make the news is if he does something extraordinary to overcome it. And then all of a sudden he's an example for all other men. It's just, we have to change our attitudes societally toward men, where we're able to look at when a man has a problem, whether it's a small problem or a big problem or something in between, whether there's a solution for it or whether he just needs to know that you have compassion for the situation that he's in. We can't just look at that like, well, we can't And we just have to set this off aside. We can't do that. We have to be able to accept that men do need compassion. And the other aspect of it is when a man has a problem and he's asking for help with it and he's asking for, advice, or he's just asking for you to listen, we need to stop acting as though the solution for his problem has to be exactly the same as it would be if he were a woman. Like the guy whose back hurts all the time. Maybe he needs to say that once, but he doesn't need to join a self-help group, or he doesn't need to join group therapy and talk about it ad nauseum for 6 months, where a woman might. A woman might need group therapy because she has chronic pain. A woman might want to talk about how hard it is for her every day, because women have not been programmed that they can't do that. And a man might simply just need to know that people are aware of it. He might not have to he might not have to talk about it ad nauseum like that. And in fact, it might make him uncomfortable. He might just want somebody to go fishing with him and hang out. He might want to go to a movie, or he might not want anything. But it might be better to let him let you know what he needs, instead of sitting around and saying, well, you have this problem. Well, I would do this. I would go to group therapy. I would go to a psychiatrist. I would go to a doctor. I would. It's not about you. It's about him. And that's something that gets pushed on men all the time. When you're feeling suicidal, go to a shrink, call a suicide hotline. Maybe just listening to what's on his mind is all that he needs. Try that first.
Someone named RT Dave wrote in the comment section, I am done with listening to feminists tell me why men kill themselves. Jane Powell, who was the head of Calm, wrote, this group are hard to reach. They don't see themselves as victims, but they believe that saying they need help in some way makes them look weak or like less of a man. We must bust this myth. And then Max writes, no, you must stop spreading your own myth. When I went through 10 years of suicidal thoughts, I never once felt any stigma about looking weak or being less of a man. I couldn't find people who could understand and take seriously that someone who was strong, fully capable of working and making their own decisions, felt that they had absolutely nothing to live for. I gave up asking for help because the help I found simply couldn't understand me. I found my own way through and rebuilt my life. It seems that many men are not managing to do that, but insisting that the problem lies with men, that if only they would talk about their feelings, life would be okay, is a self-serving lie. What if the cause of their feelings isn't faulty masculinity, but a series of catastrophic, irreversible events, such as divorce, the loss of your children, the death of what you have worked for all your life to create, backed up by a system that prejudges you to be an abuser even when you are the victim? What if the incessant messages that men are dangerous and to blame for all the wrongs and ills of the world lead a young man in a time of crisis to believe that he is irredeemable, damned for having been born male? This problem will not be solved, will not even begin to be addressed until issues that affect men and boys are taken seriously. And then Mike Buchanan, who actually made a comment on this very article, wrote, Calm is led by a radical feminist, Jane Powell. There is no crisis in masculinity, other than that which is dreamed up by feminists, who want men to act like women, to them the superior sex. She is victim-blaming. The reason many, possibly most men kill themselves is simple: reactive depression, in response to unbearable life events. My article for the International Business Times on the matter, and it includes a link. How will talking about their problems help men denied access to their children following family breakdowns, or help men who need a refuge place because they're victims of a violent wife and find all the refuge places are for women and children only? It won't. It will simply open up their wounds, reminding them that they are subhuman in the eyes of the state and much of society. Mike Buchanan, Justice for Men and Boys, and the women who love them.
Sometimes a man loses his family and his home and his job all in the same short chain of events. It's incredibly difficult to talk someone down from the ledge when they've lost that much that quickly. So if there's a rise in male suicides, maybe there's a rise in men losing their family, their home, and their job. That doesn't happen to women. The state doesn't let that happen to women. The problem is, the answer to this is called men's rights. We actually need to address the disparity in the human rights of men and women. And if what that MGTOW commenter said earlier was true, then that means we need to convince the world that women will benefit from men's rights.
Now for Honey Badger Radio number 69, where we discuss the reason why there should be a badger cave. Giggity.
The problem is that people who are creating services for men in crisis have to deal with so many problems that have nothing to do with the media flack. It has to do with funding. It has to do with just dealing with the day-to-day grind of helping people in extreme crisis, which is a grind and is very difficult. So they are fragile. They can't. The idea is that we draw off the attacks from media, hopefully, and the Honey Badger House helps with the funding. Just a helpline is really, really hard.
Mm-hmm.
Really hard. Especially one that isn't in constant danger of being shut down like Mankind UK. And he told me that. It's like it's almost an impossible aim. And the reason why is because you need someone to head it who can not only do the impossible when it comes to getting the resources to give to men, they also have to do the impossible when it comes to developing a funding stream and maintaining it outside of government help. It's like it's just not going to happen unless they have something started already that they can appeal to and have available to them. People will shut up about politics when you're making them money. And that's the God honest truth. If you are helping them somehow financially, suddenly feminists become agnostic about their feminism. So if there's two things that I think that would be win criteria or win conditions for the men's rights movement. One, you make men's rights sustainable and profitable. And two, you fund the initiatives into helping men in crisis before they get off the ground, so that the funding is already there. So we don't have any more Earl Silvermans or Mankind UKs always in the threat of being shut down and always being like hand to mouth every freaking month. But you have a consistency of service and you have a solidity. Like they know that they're going to be able to manage the financial side of it. And it may take a really long time for these things working in conjunction to lever ourselves out of this situation. But I think that's the only way to do it. Otherwise, we're just going to start creating initiatives which will be squashed by a hostile media environment or simply not being able to get the funding they need.
We've released chats, we've released financial statements, we've told you guys what we're doing every step of the way. And even with this, Allison just went through the whole list of reasons and logic behind doing this. And, I think all of the benefits of doing it, it really does explain the reasons behind why she would want to. And it's, I don't know, I guess it strikes me that I can understand people being skeptical. But it strikes me there's a degree of skepticism that's healthy, and then there's skepticism for the sake of feeling skeptical, and it becomes unhealthy at that point. And I think we're seeing a little bit of both. I appreciate the healthy skepticism because that helps us too, because it helps us to keep track of what we're doing and to know what we need to tell people about. Well, we have this information, we have this information, and so on. We know what we need to make sure everybody has. But, when it reaches a degree of there's nothing you can do that will stop us from saying you must be doing something shady, and then it's no longer healthy skepticism. It's just bullshit at that point.
But it having a nonprofit slapped on you does not make you necessarily ethical. First of all, you have to ask yourself, what are the nonprofits promoting? What kind of concepts the nonprofits are promoting? And then you have to ask yourself, well, a nonprofit, like I said, it's more like a limited profit. Whereas with a corporation, you can, or a for-profit corporation, you can do things like give parts of it to people who invest in it. So that if you invest in the concept, you get something back from it. Not so with a nonprofit. And it's a different way of setting things up, and it creates a great deal more flexibility in the structural organization. And that's why, one reason why I made Honey Badger Brigade a corporate for-profit. And then if you really want to do something positive and you really want the oversight and you really want the transparency and you really want to say, hey, somebody, the government's looking over me and making sure I'm doing what I'm doing right, then go for a charity. Don't go for a nonprofit. Do the work. And that to me seems the more reasonable solution than just being half of one and a half dozen of the other and just sitting in the middle and enjoying the perks of both. You have to have the ability to scale what you want to do to the money that you have and realize how much it's going to take. Which is why, in a lot of ways, when people are like, well, why don't you do a domestic violence shelter with men with the money that you get in? It's like, are you nuts? Seriously? Do you have a concept of how much that would cost a year to run? Like, even a helpline, how much that would cost a year to run? And in a way that, you know, you're not begging every month for funds the next month, which is in and of itself, it's like, what happens if you take on somebody who needs you and the next month you're gone? That scares the shit out of me. The idea of offering a service to someone or offering support to someone and the next month I'm gone. And what the hell do they do? That seems to me to be more unethical than not doing it in the first place. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
Which explains why it has to be something that a base like this is built before we start to try to do that. That kind of thing is something that you build up to. It's very much like making sure that you have a job before you have children. You know, because you don't necessarily, if you live paycheck to paycheck as a parent running a family, anybody out there that's ever done that should understand exactly what Allison is saying.
If we can't manage to develop at least a location, a business location for people who can sell the idea of men's rights, because that's essentially what we do. Mike does it, Hannah does it, Bunny does it. Well, maybe not men's rights, but men's issues. Brian, I don't know what he's doing. But we all are a part of selling this concept. And if you can't, like, if the community can't establish a business location to help the people who are selling the concept, you're never going to get to the point where you're able to have enough money behind the concept to do any good. And that's just reality. Like we were talking about how everybody eats because salesmen sell. This is the reality. If you can't sell men's issues to a wide enough audience to get to the point where they're willing to fund these large-scale projects, you're never going to be able to fund these large-scale projects. And if that's the goal, then the step is first, we got to get our sales in place. We got to get that in place and ready to go. And it should be that pressure and that stress needs to be taken off of the people who organize the actual services. And so it's like, it's an issue of, if you can't put in the first brick, and this is the first brick, you're not going to have a house. Ever. I went through being evicted from a convention, having my career torched, and having my name smeared by the media. Like, what happened to me is incomparable. Like, what happened to Anita is incomparable to me. If I were Anita, I would have been able to leverage that probably into a couple million. So that's the difference here. This is not profitable. And it's not necessarily that it should be. It's not why we're in it. No, there's not going to be any goddamn men's rights billionaires.
Considering what's been going on with YouTube lately, we definitely need to have our own, like, a platform outside of it, because I don't know how much longer YouTube's going to be around, at least unless something changes, you know, with all of this like anti-monetization stuff going on. But,
well, one of my followers pointed one out to me. It's not a platform that currently has monetization, but they're looking into ways to do it, and that's vid.me. Mm-hmm. And I've looked at it. I'm kind of testing it out. You can have the same content on there that you have on your YouTube channel. So I uploaded my video about feminism versus fatherhood to it, and I'm going to see what happens. But it looks like it looks pretty interesting, actually. It looks fairly easy to use.
All right. I also heard about this website called minds.com via Computing Forever, and I signed up for it.
Part of the whole idea with the Badger Cave is that we might be able to host streams, depending on whether or not we can actually manage to get better internet. We could maybe host, so the live stuff will be on through us, and then we just use YouTube as a platform for storage, and then YouTube just becomes much less important overall. And that's sort of a way to deal with that situation. We probably could also look into another platform for, archiving our videos, but I think, to be honest, I think the best way to go with this would be actually to move our videos off of anyone's platform and try to host at least the live airings ourselves, if possible. It might not be possible, but that's what I want to aim for. So you would essentially come to our servers to see the live airings, and then they'll be available. But we'll see if that's even possible, because it might not be. to be honest. But it's something to aim for, and I think that would be ultimately the best solution than going to another service. Although which one is Computing Forever's?
Minds.com.
Yeah, minds.com.
Yeah.
Well, it might be a good idea to pursue going on his service as well, depending on what we can get. Right now, we haven't really been hit too hard with the demonetization. Having said that, it's going to probably I'm tempting fates by saying that. I've only seen a couple videos demonetized, and when I contest them, they seem to remonetize them. So it's, to me, like I don't know if we're just so small that we go under the radar or some shit, but right now I'm not excessively worried. I think actually the next stage for Honey Badger Radio would probably be an app that allows you to subscribe to RSS feeds for their various shows, so that people don't have to be notified of the show streams that they're not interested in. And I think that would be value added for our customers. Our listenators. That would be value added for our listenators. I have an advisor who's done quite a bit of work in creating charities, including some entity in this region, so he knows sort of what they're looking for. And I worked with his, and the language may change, but essentially what this is going to do is going to be a foundation to promote or to fund initiatives into education for men in relation to or gender gaps in services, and also funding services to fill those gaps, and based on gender gaps in services for people in crisis. So that's essentially what the foundation is going to look at. It's going to be funding educational initiatives to bring attention to men's issues, and also try, inevitably or hopefully at some point, being able to fund actual services for those issues.
On Fireside Chat number 42, we continue the discussion around brick and mortar solutions with our special guest Elka Zwick and her plans to open a male shelter in Florida. Why do you think we have so few resources in terms of helping men that are victims of domestic violence, or even if they're, veterans that have come back and they don't have a home and they don't have any services? Well, why do you think that we have neglected them so much?
Funding.
Uh-huh.
I'd say it's funding. You don't go nibbling at the $1 billion budget that is VAWA, and from the way I understand it is it still doesn't allow programs that are exclusively for battered men or men in general. I think that's redundant.
So yeah, because we have places for women to go. I worked at one for a summer where it was for either they were battered women, and they were also women that had addictions, to substances like alcohol and drugs, and I did babysitting for their kids while they were doing like therapy sessions, and this was like at a church. So I believe this was all either government funded or donations and government funded. Probably more likely government funded though. And but you can find stuff that's exclusively for women, and you can find stuff that's for both genders, but you can't easily find something that's for just men. I mean, it's nearly impossible when you think about it. Again, Earl Silverman was trying to do it, and he couldn't manage it, so it ended with him taking his own life just because the struggles were so hard. And then I'm reminded, I believe maybe it was Erin Pitsey that actually just opened her doors personally to, mainly for women. But then shortly after that, she came to the realization that men, in most cases had it just as bad, but they had fewer services. This is definitely something that has been neglected for a while. There are probably a host of reasons for it. As you said, funding is probably a big part of it. I also think that with VAWA, there is an incentive to keep women as the primary victims so that VAWA can continue to get funded, right? At least in its own specific way. And there might be some politics behind the scenes. That there highly likely is. I'm not even trying to say there might. There obviously is. So we are looking at something very challenging. Is this one of the reasons why you're being extra? First of all, would you consider yourself to be extra cautious in terms of building this plan, And if so, is this one of the reasons, or what is the reason behind it, if not that?
Part of it is because I don't have experience in the field, and the other part is it's really overwhelming. I don't really know whom to trust. It's like I hear all this advice, and I kind of wonder whom can I trust about this. It's like back about 10 years ago, I went to a conference this was in Washington, D.C., and the organization, their cause is domestic violence. So afterwards, the last day, we went to go lobby some congressmen, and I was quiet, I was respectful, and I let them say what they had to. So I got up, and wouldn't you say that 40% is kind of almost 50%? It's almost half.
It's pretty close.
It is pretty close. So that was my reasoning. So I got up and I said that about half of domestic violence victims are men. Oh, was there an uproar? The roof could have blown off. So we went out to the commissary for lunch, and it was quiet. So a woman comes over to me. She says, "We're leaving now. We have to leave." And we had plenty of time. It was quiet in there. So I got up and followed them because I didn't know my way around Washington, D.C. I didn't know where this was going to be. So that's where they abandoned me the first time. So the second time, the second congressman, I got up, and there was another little, like a hornet's nest. So they left me to find my own taxi. The first time we went in the same taxi, and the second time I had to go for the taxi, and the third time I had to also go for a taxi all on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, and this is the mentality. The mentality is, if you're for men, that means that you're against women's issues, and it's not. It's about equality, and it's only about equality.
Right.
These men, they're not getting services. Sometimes they're being murdered as a result. Sometimes their children in the home. We're leaving a second generation of abusers and victims to grow up and perpetuate the problem. This needs to be dealt with, and instead they're like, oh, well, most victims are women. Well, not according to the federal government, they're not.
Unfortunately, as Karen would have put it, and Allison to a degree too, it's not easy to recognize men's vulnerabilities and the areas in which they are disadvantaged. And this goes for both men and women who generally either can't see or don't want to see that men can be in these positions. There was even someone who commented on a video of ours very recently, I read, said something about women who commit suicide are desperate, but men who commit suicide are cowards. And this was a comment on one of our videos. And I thought, okay, I find the idea of suicide unappealing for myself. Like, I've never been suicidal, but I'm not going to pretend that I know the amount of suffering that somebody has to go through to the point where they just figure they're better off if they're not here. Like, they just want to make it stop, right? And that is not something I would pretend to understand. But when someone says, if you do that, it's not because you have real problems, and it's not because there aren't services there for you. It's because you're a coward and you don't deserve to be here because, you took your own life, which means you weren't willing to just grow some balls, essentially. That only tells me that this is something that is more necessary but harder to sell. Because they're just to be able to accept the fact that there are men that need this, and not just men that are beaten by their wives. This is why I brought up, other examples. There are men who go to war for our country and for whatever their home country is. They come back no matter, if they had to kill other people or see their friends killed or whatever, they don't come back the same. And we don't have the appropriate amount of services for them. And we don't have a lot of sympathy for them. And a lot of them go homeless because of what happened. I mean, a large percentage of our homeless are veterans and other men that just didn't get the services they need. So we need to push for the ability to see men as vulnerable and capable of these needs. And then when we do that, I think people will be more likely to give. Right now, this is a very difficult message to get out because it's something that I think that, like you said that at a conference you mentioned that 40%, about half, of all domestic violence victims, or people who have been abused or battered or whatever you want to call it, are men. And there was a tremendous pushback, tremendous outrage. And this is something that we've seen too. People don't even want to accept that this is possible. And so that being the case, then it seems like our perception of men is part of the problem. It's part of this whole struggle to get these things made, because it's a non-starter basically. It doesn't even get off the ground if there are people who are like, men need help, right? So this is actually one of the biggest primary challenges, is to actually get men to get people to see, both men and women, to see that there are men who need help. And these men don't have to be part of other marginalized groups to get it, because you probably would be able, and I would wonder if the service in California exists because there are, for example, primarily gay communities in areas like San Francisco. They probably have shelters for men there, possibly, but part of it has to do with the fact that they're gay men, or maybe there are things for minority men. But oftentimes when those things exist, they exist because they are gay, or they are minority men, or they're trans men, instead of simply providing services for men because they're men, because they are men first. And I think that could be part of it too, because when you look at it from this progressive stack perspective, which a lot of times this is the way things go down, they will rank it they will rank the needs of people based on the groups they belong to, without considering the part that is probably the most sort of consistent throughout all of them, which is the fact that they are men in trouble. So black men in trouble, we will say, oh, well, it's because they're black. But it's got more to do with the fact that they're men than the fact that they're black. Because black women don't have the same problems. As an example, gay men and trans men, same thing. When we see trans men that are beaten, or they have issues with mental health, or they have issues with relationships and abuse, we will say it's because they're trans. But we will not accept the fact that they are also men, and they're men in danger for that reason. Because if we have to see it that way, then we have to recognize the vulnerability that men have. And that's not easy for people. So it's difficult. Somebody made an interesting comment I thought I would share with you. Zeranx wrote, if you haven't mentioned it yet, maybe you can touch on what you all mentioned yesterday regarding men being phased out of farming. Maybe the shelter could be a place for mentorship. And actually this is something to think about. But I remember we did a show a week ago about men's sheds. And I don't know if you've heard of this, but in Australia, they have these places called men's sheds. And they're like men's shelters, but instead of things where men sort of, would get together and talk about all their issues, they would actually engage in building things. Like, I wouldn't call it hobbies, but it's sort of like a way for men to, help deal with their problems, which a lot of times they do by using their hands, maybe building something, maybe, and also mentoring other men in skills like carpentry or whatever it is, right? And I think that that's something else that you could think about. It's almost like the boys club. When I was really young, I would spend my summers at the boys club, and what we would do, it was almost like the Boy Scouts, but it didn't have as much camping because it was more urban. So we would learn life skills. We would spend a lot of time with older boys and men that worked there, and it was sort of like it was essentially a male space for men to like hang out and deal with, like, it was a way to keep boys off the streets, because here in Chicago we had a lot of problems with gang violence back then, and we still do. So but we don't have boys clubs anymore. And part of it has to do with the fact that they were shut down because they were not inclusive of enough of women, And so when they got shut down, it was because essentially if women can't be, or if girls can't be allowed in boys clubs, then there won't be boys clubs. So they got rid of them. Mm-hmm. And, this can be obviously pretty destructive. So this is something else to think about that you could do with your shelter. Thank you, Zeranx, for that comment. It's just something to think about. In Polecat Cast number 77 and 3/4, we bring on the sad puppies and discuss this year's Hugo Awards.
At the same time as they recognize you overcame obstacles, it's very condescending, too.
Yes.
Like if a woman does, like, for example, I'm going to use women as example. If a woman does anything, it's almost like it's not an aspect of her personhood. It has to be shared with the sisterhood. Like it has to be as a result of the sisterhood. And it's like, no, you're erasing their personhood. I remember recently it was just this ridiculous exchange on one of my favorite shows, message boards. And they were talking about how the most current show was really good and it was written by a woman. And they were like, well, it's good because it was written by a woman or women. It was written by women, and I'm like, I sent a message, I'm like, I don't remember writing it, and then somebody else was like, please let all of them be written by women. It's like, why would you want them all to be written by women because one woman can write?
Yeah.
You want them all to be written by that woman.
Yeah, what matters is that it was written by a good writer.
Exactly. And they just take away her personal achievement.
I could, if I had been a tantrum-throwing toddler, have put in huge numbers of complaints every day of the con and several in the Hugo ceremony itself about being made excessively uncomfortable, and yes, that was the wording for their code of conduct. I'm an adult. I didn't do that. I just observed it with a certain amount of amusement. There was an effort made to try to keep the actual Hugo Awards ceremony reasonably neutral and not terribly political. It went into kind of skeevy humour in the process, but I gather that's fairly normal for these things anyway. I mean, when you're announcing the Best Novel Award with so-and-so's got a big one, somebody else has a big one, it's kind of obvious where you're going, especially given the shape of the award. But the two categories that were, well, fully rabid puppy nominations, they got no awarded. We got the, what you might call the diversity winners, two of whom were singularly classless in the acceptance speeches they had somebody read for them.
The Rabid Puppies slate, which is Vox Day, received some no awards. And for anybody who's listening, that means that they refused to vote. The committee refused to vote or decided that none of them... Sorry, go.
The voters, which I haven't looked closely at the numbers, but I suspect there was a similar action where you had a cluster of people deliberately voting down anything that they thought came off a slate, or rather came off anything that wasn't politically aligned correctly. The sad puppies are doing their best to help put the flames out, even though everybody's screaming at them that they're racist for trying to do this. The rabid puppies are jumping up and down, particularly Vox Day, going, no, we're not going to even piss on that fire. The majority of the people who I saw and who I interacted with at the business meetings, which had around about 100 to 150 people in attendance each day, those people were almost all just fans. They love their science fiction. They want to keep enjoying their science fiction. But the vibe that I got off that was the sort of vibe you get when you're interacting with somebody who has been told over and over again by someone whose approval they desperately need that nothing they do is good enough. And that's a kind of psychological abuse that will break anyone over enough time. The only thing in doubt is how long it takes. And that they are so frightened of offending this very small, rabid social justice clique that they will leap up and jump and they will run straight in to do exactly what Vox Day wants them to do and has openly said he wants them to do, because somebody from that clique is saying, oh, it will stop him. They're caught between two extremes and they have no idea what to do, and a lot of them gave off the vibe of being absolutely terrified no matter what they did, that they could not do the right thing even no matter how they tried, and they were trying desperately to do what they believed was right.
We hope you enjoyed this clip show. If there was a clip from these shows you think we should have shown, please leave a comment on the video and include a timestamp. Thank you, and Badger on.